Welcome to Mind Tricks Radio, where we'll explore contemporary topics in psychology through interviewing creative and innovative thinkers in the field. I'm your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan. Thanks for tuning in. We're here today with Dr. Catherine Pittman, a licensed clinical psychologist and psychology professor at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, Indiana. Dr. Pittman practices neurologically informed cognitive behavioral therapy and has conducted research in both fear conditioning and neuropsychology, preparing her well to explain the neurology of fear and anxiety. Dr. Pittman has co-authored 3 books: Rewire Your Anxious Brain, Rewire Your OCD Brain, and 50 Ways to Rewire Your Anxious Brain. She has been referred to as the amygdala whisperer, so it's no surprise that her most recent book is a workbook on overcoming anxiety titled Taming Your Amygdala, published by Pesci. Catherine, welcome to the show.
I am so happy to be here, Aaron.
I'm really happy to have you here. This conversation about this part of the brain called the amygdala, I think will be really interesting because I'm having patients more and more talk about this idea of the amygdala in their brain doing X, Y, and Z, but I'm not sure exactly that everybody knows exactly what that means. And I hope that today you'll be able to clear up for us what this amygdala is and why it's important.
I hope I can too, because I'm trying to find more and more people in the world who help me. I say, someone told me one time that I'm an amygdala whisperer. And I said, I need more amygdala whisperers out there too. We need a lot of them because people don't know how to communicate with their amygdalas, and that's part of what I want people to learn.
Nice. Well, that'll be your new professional nickname, the amygdala whisperer. I like that. So, before we get started getting into the meat of the interview today about the amygdala, I first like to start by getting to know my guests a little bit more. And I'd love to hear a bit more about you and your personal background, how you became a psychologist, and sort of your interest in the field.
Well, I'm the oldest of 10 kids, and I think I was given a great opportunity to watch all kinds of different people in my family develop and be very individual. And there's nothing more interesting than watching people and studying people. So I'm a big people watcher. And so psychology just came naturally as that's something where you get to focus on what's one of the most fascinating things in the world, the human, and how they get along and what they do. And so I just was very fascinated with people and got into studying psychology in college. And that's really how it started. It was just the most fun. They were the most fun courses to take.
Yeah, and I bet with a large family like that, you probably saw all sorts of family dynamics playing around between different
Yeah,
groupings
yeah,
of siblings and
yeah.
whatnot. So that's really
Yes.
cool. The amygdala, of course, has a lot to do with anxiety and fear and other emotional
hmm
regulation. How did you get interested in that specifically?
Well, there's a big accident that happened that actually resulted in me being in tears at one point. That was when I got into clinical psychology programs, and I was actually accepted to Northern Illinois University to study clinical psychology. I was assigned as a research assistant to a man who was doing rat research. And I was very upset, I mean, to the point of tears, about the fact that I was going to have to do rat research when I was going to be a clinician. I did not see why that was important. I mean, I understood some things about behaviorism, but and now it wasn't I didn't like rats. I had hamsters. I was comfortable holding rats and I wasn't anything like that. It was just, I just didn't get it. I'm supposed to be a therapist, a clinician, and you're making me deal with rats.
You weren't
So,
anticipating having rats on your
no,
therapy chair, right?
no. And so what happened was I sucked it up. I sent, now there were no emails back then, so typed a letter to the professor that I was assigned to, and I said, okay, I'm very pleased to be working with you, and can you give me some things to read that can help me understand what I'll be doing? Because I wanted to be in this program, so I wasn't going to mess it up. And the truth is, because he was working with fear conditioning in rats, and because this this professor, Sanford Dean, taught me about how to understand how fear is operating in rats. I was one of the very few clinicians who understood when Joe Ledoux wrote his book, The Emotional Brain, and it was all based on studying the rat amygdala. I completely understood what he was talking about because I had done fear conditioning and studied rats' fear behaviors. And I understood what he was saying about the amygdala, and I could readily translate that into understanding human fear because I had worked with rats. And very few clinicians do rat research when they're in graduate school, when they're studying people.
Yeah.
And so the thing that I thought was just a terrible thing, not only did I was the first one to get my master's thesis done because it's a lot easier setting up rat research than it is human research. So I was the first one getting my master's thesis done. And I said that was kind of a good thing, you know. And then I did do human research for my dissertation, but it was based in about fear. It was based about anxiety because of what I learned from working with the rats. But then, like I said, I just was one of the very few people who could understand Joe Ledoux's research. And his work in his lab made the big breakthrough on the amygdala and helping us understand where fear and anxiety and panic comes from.
Yeah, wow. So you had some very important experiences there throughout your graduate
Mm-hmm.
school training that kind of
Sure
showed
did.
you about the physiological aspects of emotion and fear specifically. Well, that's
Exactly.
yeah, fascinating. So Catherine, let's talk about this amygdala then. Give us
Okay.
a primer, not a doctoral dissertation, but a
No, no.
primer on the
Don't want to put
amygdala.
don't want to put people to sleep here.
Well,
But
you
first
probably
of all,
yeah.
first of all, I need to start by saying we actually have two amygdalas in our brain, one on the left and one on the right. And it's just like we have two of all kinds of things in our body, you know, two kidneys, two thumbs, whatever. But we tend to refer to it in the singular, just like if I'm talking about the amazing opposable thumb, I don't keep saying thumbs, thumbs, thumbs. But there are two amygdalas, one on the left, one on the right. And it's not that important to understand the differences between them. What I would say is if people say, where is the amygdala? I can tell them how they can actually kind of find their own amygdala. Isn't that kind of funny? If you do this with me now as you're
Yes, I will. I
listening.
will.
Okay, okay. Take your right pointer finger and point into your right ear.
Got it.
Okay. Then take your left pointer finger and point to your right eye.
To my
Right
right
eye.
eye, okay?
Okay, now imagine there are two lines coming from the tips of those fingers. One that's pointing into your ear and one that's pointing into your eye. If you have those lines extend and they connect in your brain back there behind your eye,
Hmm.
behind your ear, that's about where your amygdala is on that right side.
Got
And you
it.
do the same thing on the left side. That's where it is. And you know what it is? It's about the size of an and shape of an almond. And in fact, the word amygdala means almond in Greek. Of course, when they were dissecting the human brain and naming things, that's what they named this part of the brain, but they didn't have any idea what it was doing. And in fact, when I was in college and graduate school, there wasn't much knowledge about what the amygdala was doing in humans at all. And I tell my students, you know, when I was sitting in your seats, we didn't know where this whole process of fear conditioning was happening. And now we know where it is in the brain, the part of our brain that's doing it. It is actually in the amygdala. The main thing about it is that it is the part of our brain that produces the fight or flight response.
Hmm.
And that's this automatic response we have built into us that when we feel we're in danger, or actually more accurately, when the amygdala feels we're in danger, it can produce amazing changes in our body that can give us a burst of adrenaline, tense our muscles, change our heart rate, do all these things in fractions of a
Hmm.
second. And this is not just in humans, but it's in other animals like rats and dogs and horses. You know, it's in all kinds of animals. And because we can study how the amygdala operates in other animals, because humans hate when you cut into their brain, checking out what's happening in their brain. They hate that.
Yeah.
So we can study it in other animals, and we would like to think that our brains are so different than other animals, Aaron. But guess what? Especially when we're afraid, our brains operate much like other animals' brains do. We don't use our cortex very much when we're afraid because the amygdala takes over.
I was going to say, it must be a pretty old brain structure that
Mhm.
has important implications to most living organisms that have a brain. So would the amygdala be considered like what part of the brain technically is it in a human?
Well, it's part of the limbic
Hmm.
system. It's one of the oldest parts of the brain, and it has not been updated. There hasn't been an amygdala 2.0. It operates very much the way it did when the main way we survived was to run or fight or freeze and not, and stay very still and try to be as invisible as possible. And those are the processes that it produces in the body. And when we feel fear or we feel anxiety, like a sense of distress that something could go wrong, but we're not exactly sure. And when we have a panic attack, all of those responses are basically the fight or flight response in a certain way. And they're coming from the amygdala. And our cortex cannot make the fight or flight response or anxiety or fear. It interprets those feelings, it helps us process those feelings, but it can't create it. Only the amygdala creates the fight or flight response, the freeze response, the feeling we have of anxiety and fear, panic attacks, all of those come from the amygdala. And so people need to be interested in it because if you can influence the amygdala, you can have a great deal of influence over your fear responses, over your anxiety, over how likely you are to panic. So you want to get to know the amygdala. It doesn't think like we do. It's very old, very instinctual, and you shouldn't think of it as something you can communicate with words.
Hmm. Catherine, you mentioned fight or flight. Most people are pretty familiar with what that means, but you also added the freeze in there, and I know people
Yeah,
often talk about that. How do you characterize the freeze response? How's that different from fight or flight?
just what it sounds like. It's that deer in the headlights thing where an animal like us gets startled about a situation and we just don't move. And when we are prey to predators, and that's how we developed as creatures. So we learn to sometimes just be very still. And I see this in my classes. When I'm teaching classes, I shouldn't laugh at my poor students, but when I ask a question and I ask someone to volunteer, can someone explain that or can someone give an example? And I see people like avert their gaze, don't
The
move.
freeze response.
I see the freeze results like, don't call on me, da da
Yeah.
da da da, you know. And the truth is, freeze responses are very helpful. Like my golden retriever, when he bounded out into the yard, and I was hoping for him to, use the bathroom out there. But then I see a rabbit. I'm like, oh no, I don't want him to chase and catch the rabbit. That rabbit would just stay very still and not move. And he wouldn't see it. They don't have the color vision that I have, so it tends to blend into the background. As long as that rabbit stayed still, my buddy did not even know the rabbit was there. But when they
Hmm.
move, right away the dog's like, "Whoa, wait, something moved."
Hmm.
So being still is a very important survival technique. And think about it. If your boss is yelling at you about something and there's a part of you that feels like hitting him. There's a part of you that feels like running away, just leaving. It's probably a better response to just freeze and don't do or say anything. It probably keeps your job better than the other two options. And the amygdala is pretty limited that way. And so we have many, many more kind of responses we can make. But when we are feeling a threat and the amygdala takes over, then our responses become pretty limited. We can't think very clearly. The amygdala hijacks our cortex. The amygdala gives us options that are pretty limited: freeze, flee, or fight. And those are the things our body is being prepared for. And you can feel that. I have to try to explain the system, the sympathetic nervous system, and how the amygdala is very connected to these brain structures. And most people have had this happen to them where they react so quickly that they're kind of wonder who even did that, because they don't remember telling themselves to jump out of the way or telling themselves to twist the steering wheel and hit the gas really fast or what.
Yeah.
How did I even do that? And that's when the amygdala is taking over and trying to protect you. And it can create a response in your body so quickly that it's probably saved several people's lives. Those people listening to us today, they can say, yeah, I probably reacted on the basis of that automatic amygdala response to protect me.
Yeah, well, those are the two brain routes I think that you talk about with amygdala,
Mm-hmm.
and we will
Mm-hmm.
dig into that a bit
Yeah.
more because I think that's really fascinating. But before we get to that, I did want to ask you, are there individual differences in people's amygdalas? Is
Mm-hmm.
one amygdala the same for everybody, or are there variants on that based on just biology? Can they be changed through learning and development? Like, how do we put the
Mm-hmm.
amygdalas, from one person to the next in perspective?
There are definitely individual differences in amygdalas, not just in humans, but in dogs, in horses, in rats, in all kinds of different animals. Some amygdalas seem to be more reactive than others. And if you just look at infants, there are some infants when you toss them around a little too roughly, they get startled and they kind of freeze up or they shriek or something. You can tell that they're very easily startled or frightened. And I would say then you compare that to another child that you can toss them in the air, they don't seem as reactive. And we see individual differences in the amygdala early in life. They run in families, also some families, and we would say some families are more anxious than other families. You kind of see that it gets passed down. Same thing with animals you breed. So there are definitely individual differences. All amygdalas are not the same. So some of us, just have the luck of the draw. We have a more reactive amygdala, but that doesn't mean that the amygdala can't learn. And actually, that's probably why the amygdala has been preserved so carefully over the centuries, because the amygdala, we used to say, for example, fear tigers or lions, and the amygdala can adapt to become afraid of other things, whatever it is in our world that has been associated with a threat. That can be, it could be a person, with a beard. Like, for example, think of this. If you have a child who is placed on the lap of a person who's wearing a velvet red coat and has a white beard and say, ho, 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 and then you make that child stay still, the Santa holds him, carefully
Yep.
while you take pictures, that child can feel terrified
I
of
assume we were
this
talking about little Albert here.
little Albert. And so you have this child that is feeling restricted, trapped in the arms of a stranger. And so the next time little Albert or whoever sees a picture of Santa in the book, he might start crying.
Yeah.
So we can learn to be afraid of the things that threaten us or frighten us in our world, including, say, a hot stove. Once your hand touches a hot stove, the amygdala, when it sees the stove, produces a fight or flight response, back away, don't touch. And so we both learn with our amygdalas, and we can talk about that later. But also, I want to tell you, it seems we have certain things programmed into us that we're afraid. I was very disappointed that my children were afraid of thunderstorms very early in life and also afraid of bugs. And I hadn't remembered that my mom did things to help me enjoy thunderstorms. And my mom taught me not to be afraid of bugs. And we actually collected snakes in my family and different things like that. I didn't realize that. So when my children had these fears, I was like, why do they have these fears? We're programmed to be afraid of heights and water, and that comes from our amygdalas. They come built in with there's built-in fears
Oh, that's
that they're
fascinating. Yeah.
they're too common across all people for them to be anything but just a normal part of most human amygdalas.
So, Catherine, let me, like, for example, would there be like I don't know how you would even say this, an imprint of a snake or something in the brain that connects to the amygdala and just sort of automatically
There,
produces fear, even you've never seen a
mhm,
snake before as a
right.
child. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we are too frequently afraid of water as children to say that isn't something that's just part of children, or afraid of heights. Same thing with things like snakes or things that move quickly, whether it's just a little, just a little tiny beetle that couldn't hurt you at all. But it seems like our amygdalas are somehow programmed with things that our ancestors experienced. And I can't tell you exactly how that happens. Even, something else that seems really built into people, just eyes watching a person.
Hmm.
A person being looked at automatically elicits senses of fear. And of course, maybe that's generalized from an animal watching us, like a tiger's watching you. I don't know.
Yeah.
But these are things that are definitely too common. You know what the most common fear is? Public speaking,
Yeah, of
which involves
course.
what? A bunch of people staring at you,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
you know? And there's no way we're all learning that. It's happened so early to people. So it's just programming.
I don't know if you've ever stared down a monkey, Catherine, but I have. I have.
Have
And
you?
if you look right into the eyes of a monkey, you get a very strong response. It's a fight or flight. Either it'll start gritting its teeth and looking back at you with
Oh,
intensity,
really?
or it'll turn and it'll show you its butt and then run away, which I think is a submissive flight response.
Okay, okay.
But, that
Wow.
has to be a hardwired response there.
It's just we have built-in fears. But I want to tell you, built-in fears of animals and things, we can get over them. And all you have to do is teach the amygdala, and we'll be talking about that, as I said. But here, I just want to point out that even though we have this built-in fear of animals that seems to be very common, many of the people listening to this very podcast every night sleep defenselessly with their necks bared, with a sharp-toothed animal in their bed with them. We get over fears. We can get over fears. We can, so the amygdala learns. And I know I was afraid of dogs when I was little after a German Shepherd knocked me down. He was trying to be friendly, I think, but I didn't take it that way. But I love dogs, and I can barely see one without wanting to pet one now. And so my amygdala got over it.
That's a good point. If you have a pet that could be theoretically ferocious because it has sharp teeth and you're not feeling anxious being around it or
Mhm.
fearful, then there's some learning that's taken place that has
Mhm.
convinced you that they're not dangerous, right?
Right, and other things like people climbing up on, 22nd story of a building, cleaning windows out there, and
Yeah.
how the heck?
Yeah.
Our amygdalas really can learn to chill out. They do, but there's a process.
So you've talked a little bit about this, you've touched upon it, and there are these two brain pathways and triggers, two routes to get to the amygdala. And it seems
Hmm.
like they're important to understand the difference between the two of
Hmm.
them because it has to do what we're talking about learning
Right.
and fear. Could you just kind of give us a primer on that and how those work?
Okay, so what I need to start with is people need to understand something that we don't usually think about. We don't see with our eyes and we don't hear with our ears. All our eyes and ears are doing are collecting information, right? When you see something, it's actually with the very back part of your brain called your occipital lobes. The very back part is where information from your eyes gets carried to on neurons. They're carrying the information. Those are nerve cells carrying the information to the back of your head. And you see only when the information coming from your eyes is processed in the back of your brain there, up in the cortex. So that's so important. Same thing with hearing. You don't hear with your ears. The information has to get into your brain to the part of the brain that processes it. And that's so important for people to know because it takes a little bit of time for that information to get from your eyes or your ears or from the tip of your tongue when you're tasting something to be where it needs to get to be processed so you experience it. Okay, so that's important because I'm going to tell you something you're not going to understand unless you get that idea. Your amygdala is set up in such a way that it sees and hears things before you do. Now that just seems impossible.
Hmm.
But this is because there are two pathways in the brain. And that's what I need to explain. Okay, so let's say the pathways start as information is coming into your eyes or your ears or whatever. It's coming in from sensory receptors. Then you know where it goes. It goes to a part in the brain. I'm sorry, I try to introduce as few many parts of the brain as possible. But there's this part in your brain. It's the shape of a walnut right in the center of your brain called the thalamus. And what the thalamus does is it collects all the information coming in from your different senses, from your eyes, from your ears, even from your butt as you're sitting on a chair. It's collecting all the information that came up through your spinal cord, um, and carrying to this thalamus. Now the thalamus's job is to figure out where in the brain do I send this to be processed. So like the information from the eye, it says, oh, you got to go to the back part of the brain, back part of the head there. The ear information has to go to kind of your temple area, so it knows where to send it. So that's a pathway where you can see and hear things by information coming in up your spinal cord, from your eyes, from your ears, going to the thalamus, then going to the cortex to be processed, right? But here's something else that happens. As information comes into your eyes and into your ears, and then it gets sent to the thalamus does something very important. It says, here, amygdala, check this stuff out. And it sends it to the amygdala. The amygdala is really close to the thalamus. So it gets to the amygdala really quickly. But what the information that's being sent to the from the thalamus to your amygdala at the same time as sending it up to the cortex, but it gets to the amygdala first, and the amygdala can see or hear things before it gets processed in your cortex. So it sees and hears things before you do. And that's why when you hear a noise, sometimes you jump back. Like, here would be an example. Like, you're in the store looking at some bananas, and somebody comes up behind you and says, hey, and you turn around with a fist ready to hit somebody.
Yeah.
You turn around, and what that is your amygdala hears that and says that's a threatening sound, and you turn around ready to fight, and the next thing you hear after hey is Aaron. I
Uh-huh.
haven't seen you in years.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good example of like when people say, "I seemed like I reacted without thinking."
Exactly. And you actually probably reacted without even hearing very well, because the amygdala gets this information, sensory information, before you get it, right? Before your cortex gets it. So one of these pathways, it creates anxiety this way. Information comes in, the thalamus sends it to the amygdala checks it out and says, that's no big deal, doesn't react. The amygdala says, oh my God, this is dangerous, you should react. Or the amygdala, actually, I want to tell you, it doesn't only deal with fear. It also can say, that smells good, or that looks pretty, or that looks tasty. Like, that's a chocolate chip cookie. I want it. The amygdala analyzes these things and decides if it wants to approach it or run away from it or whatever. And that all is happening before you have time to even know what you're seeing or hearing. And this is really important for people to recognize, because it's saying that your anxiety and your fears occur before you've had time to think and process things. So honestly, we just got to admit we're not in control of these emotions. They happen without us being able to keep up with them. They're fast, but they also save our lives sometimes. They help us react very quickly. So on the freeway, you might have made a quick response that saved you from being in a bad accident because your amygdala took over. So now here's the other thing. There's another pathway too. So that pathway, we would say that is this fast amygdala pathway, that when you're experiencing that, it's usually that you feel nervous about something and you're not sure why. It happens very quickly. It also could be that you hear a sound or you see something that causes you to react immediately so quickly that you don't even have time to react. Here would be an example. You're in the bathtub and you're taking a shower, standing there with water, and you suddenly kind of see something and instantly you're jumping out of the shower into the bathroom and not being in the bathtub anymore. And then you look back in there because you saw something. You look down there and it's something brown with little things sticking out of it. And you say, that's a wad of hair. But your amygdala thought it looked close enough to a spider that you better get the hell away from it. Right? Now, here's the thing. Why does that happen? Because the amygdala does not see things with the cortex at first. It sees things like a quick and dirty picture, like, those Polaroid cameras that you take a picture of something and it spits out an image, but at first you can't see the image very well.
Yeah.
So as you're looking at it, it starts to develop. And so you're like, okay, this is something with four legs. It's a cow or a dog. I don't know.
It's a low resolution image that says
That's
something's there. It doesn't really matter what it is, but it might very well be dangerous.
Joe Ledoux, who really did a lot of writing on the amygdala, he would say, if an amygdala sees a curvy shape, it's going to make you jump away from it. It might turn out to be a vine or a stick, but it saved you. It's like, do you want me to wait and have you step on a snake, or do you want me to rescue you from that? It's like, I'm going to be careful. And this is
Yeah.
the way the amygdala is. So I like the way you say it, low resolution image. But we see things so much more clearly with our cortex because we get the cortex image. That's what we're experiencing. There's another way anxiety can occur, and that's the cortex pathway. So it's information comes in through the senses and it goes to the thalamus, and this is the pathway where the thalamus sends it where it needs to be processed in the cortex, right? Gets processed in the cortex, and you see it. Then the amygdala has access to it. And that is, if you could see, the amygdala has all kinds of connections up into your cortex, up into other parts of your brain. And you know what? I got to tell you, Aaron, the amygdala is watching cortex television. The things that
Mm.
you are seeing, the things that you are hearing, the things that you are even thinking about, this is kind of scary. If you're just imagining something, like let's say you are imagining a snake, your amygdala is watching all of that happening in your brain somehow because it reacts to your thoughts and your senses. So, for
Wow.
example, once you are standing there looking into the bathtub and you are processing that is a wad of hair and it does look similar to a spider, but you're processing it with your cortex and you got the details of it and you actually can even label it, wad of hair from my last shower. Once that happens, the amygdala also gets that information. And the amygdala says, oh, we can get back in the bath. It's okay. But do you know what? I want to tell you something. This is what's sad. All those things that your amygdala created in your body, your heart pounding, your muscles tense, your mouth might be dry. You've got all this adrenaline released in your body, all these things that happened that made you able to jump out of that shower so quickly. Those don't just turn off immediately. They're still affecting your body. So when you get back in the shower, you might have this feeling like I'm still uneasy. I'm still checking around, making sure there's not a spike. You're not feeling calm. And if you think about it too much, if you say, why am I still scared? Why am I still scared? And you don't know because you don't think to yourself, I just misinterpreted that, and my amygdala produced the fight or flight response. But see, people who are listening to us now are going to know this. They're going to say, they're going to be able to say to themselves, and this is what's useful about this kind of presentation we're doing. We're telling people sometimes your amygdala produces a very real fear response. You are really feeling afraid, and your heart rate is different. Your blood pressure is different. You have more adrenaline in your bloodstream than you did before. You are actually feeling something really real, but there's absolutely zero reason why you should be feeling afraid because it was just a wad of hair. But your amygdala doesn't always see things correctly. It jumps away from vines that look like snakes. It makes you jump out of the shower, for a bad reason. It didn't see things correctly, but it operates on, I don't take a risk. If there's a potential danger, I'm gonna have you react. So you are under its influence, and you didn't make yourself jump out. It was the amygdala. If you can understand what just happened, I had the fight or flight response. It can't turn off immediately. I'm going to feel this fight or flight response in my body for a couple more minutes because it won't turn off immediately.
What about at a deeper clinical level? Let's talk about, for example, people who suffer from chronic anxiety. They have phobias, for example, or even trauma. And I'm sure that the amygdala must play a role in all of those different kinds of conditions. And then later on, obviously, as clinicians, we help patients see like whatever you were traumatized before in the past, that trauma isn't necessarily present in the present, or the phobia is out of proportion to what's really going on, even if the person maybe had a bad experience with the thing that they're have phobias about in the past.
Hmm.
Where's the
Right.
connection here in terms of the fear response in the amygdala?
Well, when a person is having reactions that they don't understand, it's really good to help introduce them to the amygdala and say, you don't have access to what your amygdala is thinking. It doesn't really think in the way we do. It's in an unconscious part of our brain, just in the same way that you're not aware of your brain controlling how much adrenaline's being released or how much your thyroid hormones are being released, or it's being run in a part of our brain we do not have access to
Mhm.
consciously. And you don't want to. It'd be too much to try to think about all that stuff. It's just happening. So that's the amygdala, right? So if a person says to me, why am I so nervous about clowns? I do not find clowns amusing. I'm really scared of clowns.
They,
And
they can
I
be
would say,
creepy.
yeah, yeah. And but they can say, I just if I see a clown, I want to run away. And so I would say, well, you don't remember why you're afraid, but your amygdala still remembers. First thing I'll do is I'll say sometimes, why don't you ask your mom why you're afraid of clowns? And your mom might come back with a story. Oh yeah, your third birthday, your uncle said he was going to dress up as a clown for your birthday. Scared the crap out of you. We had to make him go in the bedroom and take everything off. It wasn't funny to you. It wasn't enjoyable. He just scared you. So we've kept you away from clowns ever since.
Yeah.
So what happened was here was something that a child associated with danger for whatever very strange looking thing. Maybe he said boo, maybe he was like, I'm gonna get you, whatever. But the child was like, no, that is bad. The amygdala is the part of the child that's saying, this is dangerous. Do not. Once that idea of someone with a big red nose or big poofy orange hair or whatever it was is paired with that emotional reaction, the amygdala is going to remember that. And this is what makes the amygdala helpful to us. The amygdala says if you walked off in the wood one time and there was a wolf there, you don't want to go off in the that wolf area anymore. So you're afraid of that area. And that could save your life that you don't go back into that area. The amygdala learns from bad things that have happened to you, and says, stay out of that area, stay away from that thing, don't touch that oven. And the amygdala is learning this, but sometimes it learns that something's dangerous, like me learning that the dogs are dangerous, when later my grandma's dog, I was afraid of it and it never hurt me. Why was I afraid of that dog? Because fear generalizes to similar things. And so we're built luckily that we don't have to have a bad experience with every single kind of dog to become afraid of every single kind of dog. We generalize our fears, the same thing, all kinds of situations that remind us of someone, people who remind us of someone else, people who sound like someone else. Our fears generalize to things that are close enough to that thing that was dangerous to us or was a threat to us. So, first of all, we've got to recognize that we can have fears that we don't understand, but if we start to try to understand our amygdala, we may be able to figure them out. The good thing is, this is really good, Aaron. Guess what? You don't have to know how you became afraid of dogs to know how to get over your fear of dogs. Now, if someone says to me, do I need to get over my fear of clowns? I'll say, Do you need to work with clowns? Do you need to be around clowns? And if they say no, we don't have to get over all our fears. Someone will
Right.
say,
Good
I
point.
can't ride on a train or a bus. And I say, do you need to? If they say, well, how am I going to get to work in Chicago? I don't want to be driving.
It's funny. We don't have snakes in Hawaii, so people sometimes talk about fear of snakes, and I say, well, how big of a problem is snakes to you? Because we don't really have snakes in Hawaii, and they're like,
Right, right.
well, that's true. But I never fly anywhere else because I'm afraid of encountering them someplace else. Like, well,
Oh.
okay then. So that it might be a reasonable issue to work on.
When you're feeling afraid, even sometimes you feel hostile, like you feel like you should fight someone. They're a threat to you and you need to defend yourself. This is coming from the amygdala. And as you get to know more about your amygdala, you understand more what's happening. The amygdala learns from experiences. And so if people have been through traumatic experiences, they learn, and they don't just learn to be afraid of that person. They could be learned, like one of my clients, she would have very anxious moments when she was at Christmas parties with her coworkers when they were drinking and having a good time and they were kind of loud. She would get really panicky and she was trying to figure that out. And you know how her cortex tried to figure it out? She was the CEO of this company and she said, maybe I'm intimidated by these men and I shouldn't be the CEO. Now, none of them would agreed with that. I said, no, your amygdala is somehow afraid of these men. I said, have you ever been around men drinking and in danger? She said, well, my dad was a bad alcoholic when I was a young child. He got over that. He went to AA but she said when he was loud and angry, and I said, so that's probably why you feel nervous around them. And we can help you get over it. Even if she couldn't have figured it out, I could help her figure out ways to get over it, right?
Right.
But she said to me, is my amygdala 5 years old? And I said, well, your amygdala hasn't learned too much about loud drinking men since you were 5, I guess.
Yeah.
She said, yeah, I've stayed away from loud drinking men my whole life.
Well,
You
that's
know,
a perfect example, right? That's a very perfect example about that.
it learns from traumas and we may not remember, but we can still help people even if they're not sure why they're, afraid of elevators or if they don't understand why it is that when they have to give a presentation that it feels so threatening. We still know how to help them. And it may come from trauma, but also, like I said, we have built-in fears. It's normal for most people to have problems with doing presentations in front of important other people. I can't believe how many brides are afraid of being the focus of attention in the wedding. It's supposed to
Yeah.
be the happiest day of your life, but you're so nervous sometimes.
In your book, Taming the Amygdala, you do a really nice job with lots of different kinds of exercises to help work on ways of coping with fear and anxiety. It's a big part of that
Hmm.
book, obviously.
Hmm.
And I want to just sort of touch on some of this so you could give us some ideas what you
Okay.
get into in more detail in the book. And there's a few different categories of them. And again, I'd like to like tie this into the amygdala as much as possible so that you can
Yes.
explain to us how these things help work on the amygdala and the fear and anxiety that kind of generates through the amygdala. One thing you talk about is just calming the amygdala in general. How do we do this? And what are sort of the ongoing effects to the mind and body by doing that?
Okay, well, let me start with saying I am so happy to tell you that if you understand the amygdala, suddenly it opens up whole new ways to combat your anxiety and fear that you didn't know you had. And we have had them before, but people didn't believe in them. But once we start saying that all of that panic, anxiety, fear come from the amygdala, then people say, okay, well, how do I affect my amygdala? And then we tell them things, and they think we're silly sometimes because
Mm,
here's one thing we say, there's a certain kind of breathing, this deep, slow breathing. And I want to tell you, I learned how to teach people relaxation breathing way back 30, plus years ago. If you understand what an fMRI machine is, it's something that shows you the parts of your brain that are being used at a given time. It like kind of shows those areas as lit up in a brighter color because you're using this part of your brain. When your amygdala gets activated, we can actually put you in an fMRI machine and we can see your amygdala is lit up, right? In other words, it's activated. And I say, it's the craziest thing, but if you do a certain kind of breathing, it calms the amygdala down.
Wow.
And when you talk about the fact that the breathing affects the amygdala, and we can actually see this happen, we can actually see that color cool down. And how do we do this? I mean, we've done studies where we show people scary images, images of like people trying to get out of houses on fire, or people holding children that have been injured. And it's very upsetting. The amygdala starts to activate, and we start to feel nervous just looking at these images. And then we say to some people, while you're looking at these images, do this deep breathing. The people who do the deep breathing, their amygdala stay calmer than the people who don't do deep breathing, you
Wow.
know? And so I need to explain this to people, that this kind of thing that you think is nothing, it's just breathing and you do it all the time, but it's a certain type. It's this slow diaphragmatic breathing. Why we think it does that. Like when you jumped out of the shower and took some deep breaths and started to calm things down, the amygdala responds to that too. And you're aiming for about 5 to 6 breaths per minute. That's the pace you're trying to do. You can watch a minute, a second hand on a clock, and kind of time it. That's the kind of breathing we want to do. When I say 5 to 6 breath, a breath would be in and out. That's one breath. Do 5 to 6 breaths per minute, that kind of pace. And also, diaphragmatic breathing is where you feel your stomach being pushed out when you're breathing. Put your
Right.
hand on your stomach, put your hand on your chest. You're moving your stomach more than you're moving your chest when you're really expanding your lungs.
Yeah.
So just learning how to, and you know how long it takes to calm your amygdala down? We see calming happen just in, 5, 10 minutes.
You list a bunch of these. You talk about the breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, and imagery.
Relaxing your muscles. That's very important. If you relax the muscles in your face, in your shoulders, in your arms, in your legs, all of that, just relaxing those muscles also sends a message to the amygdala that we're okay.
Yeah, so Catherine, I have a really important question to ask you on this. So I can understand a person is feeling activated, and these are techniques to help bring a person back down to calm their amygdala. But what about this idea about just sort of like the baseline thermostat level of your body in terms of anxiety? Is there something to be said for practicing these calming techniques that help sort of chronically help the amygdala lower the degree of reactivity that it has and calming it down?
Right. And I think that's a really good idea to say. We don't want to just turn it down in a moment. Is there a way that we can kind of reset it to a lower level so it's not going around so activated all the time? And definitely there are ways to do that. We actually see changes being made in the amygdala when you do regular exercising, at least 3 times a week, aerobic exercising for say 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week. It tends to make your amygdala to be a calmer amygdala. So even though your amygdala tends to be more activated, you're pulling that level down, right? Also, if you do yoga, and I think it's because you're stretching and relaxing muscles, you're doing deep breathing, these kind of things that we were talking about, if you do yoga regularly, you get a calmer amygdala. And if you deliberately during your day take time to actually say, I'm going to just reset myself right now. Do it after I come out of a class. I just try to just breathe deeply and relax and just kind of bring everything back down to a lower level. You can do that. You can cool off your amygdala as you go through your day. And also, if you practice relaxing your muscles and breathing deeply, and you use a word like relax or release or peace or something, if you pair that word with relaxing, then you can use that word to kind of bring all that back, quickly by just saying relax, and it kind of gets paired with that relaxing. The other thing I cannot fail to mention is sleep is so important. And your amygdala needs a certain kind of sleep, I'm sorry to say. You need REM sleep, REM, REM, rapid eye movement sleep. And you know when this occurs? It occurs the most in the last 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And most people say 7 to 8. What 7 hours? What 8 hours sleep? My students especially say, I don't ever get that much. And I said, if you would get more sleep, your amygdala will calm down. And some people who wouldn't even try sleeping more, when they know they have an amygdala, when they know that it needs a certain kind of sleep that doesn't occur much in the first, 4 or 5 hours of sleep, but it occurs more in the seventh and eighth hour of sleep, they will start to fight for their sleep. And when they realize, oh my God, I am so much calmer. It's my amygdala is calmer, isn't it? That's what it is. Yep, that's what you're feeling. You're not so jumpy. So exercise and sleep. I've had people who've said, I don't want to go on any medicine. I say, okay, well, use exercise and sleep. And they say, this is better than any medicine I've ever been on.
I wanted to ask you just sort of one other grouping of types of ways in which we could be helpful for the amygdala. The first one was more of the calming techniques you were talking about, and those make a lot of sense. But what about other kinds of ways that employ, I guess, what we might call cognitive behavioral strategies, where the cortex is definitely directly more involved, and that can be anything from cognitive behavioral therapy itself, exposure therapy, other ways in which you're actively thinking about your fears and anxieties and having that connect to the amygdala in terms of retraining it.
Well, let's start with exposure therapy. I want to tell you what exposure therapy is teaching the amygdala. And the amygdala doesn't learn from anything we say in therapy. It doesn't learn from anything we say to it, like amygdala, calm down. There's no reason to be afraid, amygdala. This is fine. It doesn't affect the amygdala. No words are going to do that. You know how the amygdala learns, and this is exposure therapy is based on this. The amygdala learns from its experience. So the way I learned to not be afraid of dogs was I was around a dog that I could watch that didn't do anything to harm me, that I then got a little closer till I petted it, different things, and I started realizing it was soft and fun. And the amygdala has to learn that dogs are safe or to learn that speaking in front of people is safe. And the only way it can learn is it learns by being put in the situation and not allowed to leave until it learns. And you can feel when the amygdala learns. You know how you feel it? You can kind of feel your fear starting to come down. And I've had clients who say to me, oh my God, I can feel my fear already come down. And it's only been like 6 minutes or so. I thought I was going to be here an hour before I started to feel this. I said, your amygdala gets it. If there's not a danger, your amygdala will learn. It doesn't take hours and hours usually, but you do have to do this repeatedly.
It's almost like the amygdala is sort of like, hey, talk is cheap.
Yep,
Show me proof. And the proof, and you're not going to just show me proof one time immediately. Like I'm going to have to really be convinced that this proof is here, that I don't need to see this as a threat anymore. You're not going to be able to convince me or use fancy words or anything.
right. And the key is in exposure therapy, we do not put people in danger. We put people in a situation where they feel uncomfortable, they feel anxious, they could even feel panicky perhaps, but we don't put them with a dog that's going to harm them. We don't put them in a situation that could be dangerous. We have to present them with situations where the amygdala can learn to feel safe. And once you do this, it's amazing how empowering it can be, where you feel like I can show my amygdala that I can go to the mall by myself. Whereas before that, I didn't think I could, but I'm going to show my amygdala that I can do it. And I'm amazed how empowered people feel. The important thing, though, is that most of the time, our fears are not just the amygdala, they're also related to the cortex, too. And to really, those two pathways of anxiety, to anxiety, when you are when you're doing exposure, you're focusing on the amygdala pathway, but you also have to be careful about what's happening in the cortex pathway. So, for example, remember I told you that the amygdala watches cortex television. So, what you are seeing and hearing and how you're thinking about it Even if, like, let's say my daughter is late for coming home, and I'm thinking it's snowy out there. We have really bad ice in Indiana sometimes, and I'm thinking this doesn't happen in Hawaii, I'm sure. And I'm thinking, I hope she didn't slide off the road. And then you know what I do? I start to maybe imagine how it would look if she slid off the road. You know how your brain does that? And I'm thinking to
Yep.
myself, my daughter could be in danger. That's why she's late. The amygdala reacts to that image as if that is happening. You start to feel nervous. And then guess what? Because now you know, okay, that your amygdala will feel nervous because of the thoughts you have. Even if the thoughts are just a complete fantasy and there's no chance that they're even happening, you can start feeling nervous. Well, here's what happens though. The average person doesn't know, why am I feeling nervous? The average person just feels, the more I think about this, the more I'm feeling nervous. That must mean this is a problem. And they trust the feeling. They don't know this is my amygdala creating anxiety because it doesn't know that this is just a thought I'm having. So we have to realize that when we think certain thoughts, like my daughter could be in a car accident right now. And especially if I call and she doesn't answer, and then I think she's upside down in a ditch, and that, she can't reach her phone. And anyway, you're scaring yourself. And so many times when we're trying to tell people what you think matters, if you are getting ready to give a talk and you're thinking about all the things that can go wrong, that is going to make your anxiety worse. But then people will say, but it could go wrong. I'm thinking about these things because I'm trying to help myself. I'm preventing them. And I'm saying, yeah, that's true. But you're thinking about scary things. It's not a good time to be thinking about. They sometimes logically they'll just say it makes sense that I'm thinking this could happen. But I say, okay, here's cut to the chase. Do you want to scare your amygdala? It doesn't feel good when your amygdala is all jacked up. You want to jack up your amygdala because that's what you're doing. And suddenly people are more willing to maybe think about my thoughts might need to be controlled better. If you want to stop thinking about something, you shouldn't tell yourself to think about it, not even to think about, stop thinking about it, right? You should change the channel in your brain. You should think about something completely different.
Well, a lot of anxiety, like especially like I'm thinking of OCD, telling somebody to stop thinking about something doesn't get them to stop thinking about it at all. It's hitting up against resistance that you just can't possibly affect. So, Catherine, is there a correct way to worry? Like, what would be sort of an adaptive way of doing that?
Well, one thing I say is I try to explain to people how I think worry developed. I tell a little story about a woman who is ancient cave woman, because we women will say this, will say, I think women invented worry because we're so good at it. But we share it with everyone, though. I know you've got it too. But worry is something that's in our cortex. It's in the left frontal area right here in my cortex. And when I'm worrying, what I'm doing is I'm thinking of negative outcomes that could occur in a situation. That's what worry is. You're imagining and thinking about things that could go wrong, bad things that could happen in a situation. And humans didn't originally have worry circuitry like this, but they started to develop in some humans. And then, boy, it took off because I think it was adaptive and helpful that we worry. But you have to know how to worry correctly. So I'm going to tell you about this cave woman, all right? So this woman, well, she's not a cave woman because she advanced beyond caves. She decided she could actually build huts for herself and design them a certain way, and store food in them. And she could put them in places she wanted. Like she built this hut near a stream. Okay. And it was so nice to have it near the stream because one, she could get water easily. Two, she could dunk her kids in there and clean them easily. And also there were fish and other things, frogs and things that were there that were food. So she thought this was great. But one day, this woman did something that was unusual for prehistoric women. She worried, and here's what that is. She thought of a negative outcome that could happen. It was raining, and she saw the stream getting deeper and deeper, coming up farther and farther, and she thought of something that she'd actually never seen. She did that a lot. She'd never seen a hut before she built one. She thought
Mm-hmm.
about things. So she thought of something. She thought about that water coming up so high that it came into her hut. It came up so high it washed all the food she stores in the washed away her children in the hut. She started having these thoughts of negative things that could happen. And it all had to do with this worrying, right? But then what she did is that activated her amygdala. And that made this something that she couldn't just let go of because she was feeling nervous. That nervousness made her kind of focus on what was in her mind, what she was thinking about. And she said, this idea of that water washing away my hut, and she got an idea. I'm going to move my hut away from that. I'm going to deconstruct it. I'm going to build it somewhere else. I can do it again. And it's going to be up there where no matter how much water comes, I don't think the water, but I'll still be close enough to the water, to the stream, but I don't want to be this close anymore. Right. And so if she does that and she moves her hut, what she actually did was she came up with a plan to deal with her worry. Right. And so the good thing about worry is that it alerts you to a danger, right? But notice, was it worry that really helped her? Was it the worry that saved her and her children from a bad fate? It wasn't worry. If she had just worried, that wouldn't have been enough. What she did is she made a plan and she carried out that plan. Right? So what I talk to people about is I say, if you are worrying, use it correctly. Don't just worry and worry and worry and worry. Use your worry to come up with a plan. Move away from worry. But here's the thing that some people do. After they carry out the plan, they go back to worrying. They keep thinking, I'm going to have something happen. I'm going to have something happen. No, don't go back to worry. It served its purpose. Now, sometimes people will say, I'm worried I don't have money to pay my mortgage. Do I have to come up with a plan? I say, yeah, come up with a plan. And so they say, okay, so I'm going to borrow money from my brother. Okay, will that be okay, you think? That'll be my plan. I say, you don't have to carry out your plan immediately. Is the mortgage due right now? Sometimes you hold on to the plan. And you just say, okay, my plan is if I don't have enough money when the mortgage is due, I'm going to ask my brother. But you can just hold the plan. You don't have to carry it out like the woman had to carry out the plan. But you can just hold a plan. Now, people will say to me this, Erin, they'll say, what happens if you find a flaw in your plan? You know what I say? You're worrying about your plan. Yeah. Okay. So what would you do if there's a worry? They say, you come up with a plan. I say, come up with a plan to deal with the worry that you have about the plan, right? And I say, but if you keep doing this, you are just cycling through worry. But sometimes you do find a problem in your plan. You go, oh, shoot, I forgot my brother said he's going to be gone on vacation. Okay, now that's a problem. Okay, so make a plan.
But that's a new piece of information.
Yeah.
That's a new piece of information that you have that then you can alter your plan based on that. But what I hear you say, which makes a lot of sense, is you have an issue or a problem or a topic, you come up with a plan, and unless there's new information or something that would arguably need to change that plan because there's something different there, then running it over it again and again and again and again doesn't help or change anything.
Right. And knowing the worrying where you're dwelling in the, okay, I have to tell my family that I'm losing my house. And you're going through, it's like, no, you're back in imagining the worry. You have your plan. Stick with your plan. Move on. And what it is think about other things. Think about what you need to make for supper now. Call a friend and don't talk about your mortgage. Talk about her kids. Do
Yeah.
something else. Get off the worry channel. Get off the
Yeah.
worry channel because worry isn't the thing that helped that woman in prehistoric times. It was her plan that helped her, and the worry just served to bring her attention to the need for a plan. And after that, it was just you're just activating your amygdala, and you're just suffering on the worry channel.
Catherine, this has been super fascinating, really interesting conversation. Now I know a lot more about the amygdala, and I'm definitely going to have better ways of talking about this now with my patients. And I do quite a lot of work on managing anxiety and fear, all the exposure and CBT stuff. So this has been Very helpful for me, and I thank you for that. I want to see if you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with today about this topic before we wrap up.
Well, what I'd really like to say is I think it can be very helpful once you understand that it's a part of yourself called your amygdala, and that there's a part of you that you do not have direct control over, that creates your fear, your anxiety, your panic, and that when that is happening, there are very limited options you have in affecting it. But once you're introduced to the amygdala, it gives you not necessarily ways to control the amygdala. Will never really, it'll always be a step ahead of us in ways. It will always operate in ways that we can't flick it back off. You know, it creates processes. But the thing is, if you understand that you do have some things that can impact it, both short term, like in the moment by deep breathing or by exercising that change at the moment, but also you can calm it down more generally if you include better sleep to get that REM sleep and exercise. That knowing it's there and knowing there are things you can do to change it, and that some things it's going to do, it's going to give false alarms. That's something that is helpful to learn, though. To say every time I'm afraid, it doesn't mean that I'm in danger. Sometimes I'm afraid, and it's a completely false alarm. But see, the average person it stop them, right? And the average person also thinks sometimes the best way to deal with their fear is to avoid things because they don't know their amygdala. But sometimes that avoidance is costing you a job, costing you some fun, costing you relationships, right? And so I really want to say getting to know your amygdala and understanding it can really help you have much more control about stopping anxieties and fears from blocking you in your life.
I think those are very wise words, and thank you for introducing this concept and introducing the amygdala to us today. I think it was a really fascinating conversation, and it was wonderful having you here.
Well, you definitely sign up to be an amygdala whisperer, going out there and teach people how to communicate with their amygdalas.
I will be an amygdala whisperer. I'm happy to do
Okay.
so. I'm fully sold on this. So
Okay.
thank you for dubbing me an amygdala whisperer
Yay.
acolyte here, and I will take that forward with me.
Okay. Great talking with you, Aaron.
Likewise, Catherine, thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to Mind Tricks Radio. I hope you have enjoyed the program. For more information about Mind Tricks, you can go to my website, www.waikikihealth.com. Be sure to subscribe to Mind Tricks on your preferred podcasting host to be notified of new episodes of Mind Tricks. Please take some time to give Mind Tricks a good rating and review wherever you are listening. It really helps get the word out to new listeners. And please like and share Mind Tricks posts on Twitter and Facebook by following your host, Dr. Aaron Kaplan.